They traverse the Milky Way, the winding waterway. May the afterworld take your hand to the place where Orion is.
At the dawn of history, 2,500 years before Christ, an entire civilization gathered to build the greatest monuments on Earth. 13 million tons of solid rock, enough to build the city of London, were hauled across the desert. Why?
Okay. So, I'm hoping that was loud enough. He said, he used the phrase, before Christ. Not just a couple of years before Christ, maybe 50 years, 100 years, not even 200 years, way, way, way past that. So, why is this part of history excluded from the Bible? You get little bits and pieces of Egypt, but it's all about slavery and wrongdoing. I got questions. I got legitimate questions, and I need answers. So, let's dig a little deeper into this.
What vision drove this? Scholars say they served as tombs for 3 dead pharaohs. Robert Bauval, British author and researcher, born in Alexandria, spent much of his life in the shadow of the Great Pyramids. He believes there is a far greater vision behind these pyramids. Over the last 20 years, he quested for that greater meaning, echoed in ancient whispers of stars, of myths, and the beginning as Egypt saw it. In the beginning there was darkness and an ocean of chaos. From it emerged a mound, and on it rose the sun, Ra. Then the Bennu bird, the phoenix, flew up, and its first cry set the world in motion.
Now, the Benben was shaped like a cone or a pyramid. This was the cross of ancient Egypt. This was the most holy of symbols.
Such a symbol still lies in Cairo Museum, the polished capstone of a pyramid. The high priests of Heliopolis were second only to the pharaohs. They were renowned as builders, magicians, healers, and astronomers. One is known by name, Imhotep, who would later be venerated by the Greeks as Asclepios, the father of medicine. But he is also mentioned for his knowledge of the stars and as the ground layer of the Great Pyramids. Did knowledge of the stars come into their building?
Scholars say that the ancient Egyptians did not have a high knowledge of astronomy. But here is evidence of their fascination and sophisticated knowledge of the sky. Look at the zodiac constellation. Leo, Taurus, Pisces, and here the constellation of Orion and the star Sirius.
Many civilizations give a special place to the constellation of Orion. Before the horns of Taurus, he stands as the great hunter with his belt of 3 stars. To the Egyptians, he was Osiris, god of afterlife, and he is closely linked to the pyramids. Bauval was to find out how close.
Everything here attests to a grand unified plan, a master plan. And yet there's something very perplexing about this plan. We have 3 pyramids, 2 of which are of almost identical size and are set along a diagonal line. And yet here's the curious thing. The 3rd pyramid is much smaller and is offset to the left of this diagonal line. Why? What were the pyramid builders trying to do? The problem had been nagging me for years, and on a night like this, sitting in the desert with a friend of mine, he was telling me how the star Sirius would rise, and then he pointed in the sky and showed me the belt of Orion right above. And he said, you notice how the three stars run in a row, but at the top star, the smaller star, is slightly offset to the left. And suddenly I had it.
Bauval knew two other pyramids nearby also carried star names, and what he saw was stunning. Orion, the god Osiris, stood in heaven as on earth. But something didn't fit. The Egyptians saw the Nile as the Milky Way, and evidently the pyramids as Orion. But in the Pyramid Age, Milky Way and Orion stood differently in relation to each other, and he found the computer was looking at the wrong epoch.
Now, in order to get a perfect match with the pyramids on the ground, the sky needs to be rotated slightly anti-clockwise. This means going back in time, 3000 BC, 4000 BC, 5000 BC.
The position of the star changes through time through the phenomenon of precession. The Earth not only turns each day, as with a giant top, its axis also makes a slow wobble every 26,000.
So,
On Earth, this makes the star scene go slowly up and down throughout the...
this professor, he's trying to figure out the alignment of the stars. And like with anything else in the world, you can't always judge something by your own understanding. And I thought about that when I was listening to my pastor during the one session at church. And he was saying how God, in the Bible, God says, leave it not to your own understanding. So that had me thinking, how many times have we as human beings screwed something up because we tried to inject our own understanding? You're examining something that happened way before you, so you can't use your current understanding of things. You have to try to put yourself in their shoes. We call a lot of stuff paganism. Oh, well, they worship this and they worship that. Okay, but why? Why did they do it? First of all, they're primitive. They didn't have the knowledge that we have today. So stop stop trying to figure it out in your daily terminology. Try to put yourself in their shoes, what they were going through. We didn't always have cars. We had carts and we had horses, which end up translating to horsepower later on. So what I'm saying is, I think if we rethink what was going on back then from their perspective. I thought I heard somebody. From their perspective, we might figure out more than you'll figure out something that you didn't see before. Okay? One more section and then I think I want to stop.
Now, this is a reconstruction of the sky in 2500 BC. And let's see what happens to Orion's belt as it crosses the north-south line.
The shaft from the king's chamber pointed at Orion, the god Osiris.
Now, to the left of Orion, and here is the star Sirius. To the ancient Egyptians, it was the star of Isis, the consort of Osiris. And I was amazed to discover this.
Bauval discovered that the last shaft pointed at Sirius, star of the goddess Isis. The ancient Egyptians were making pathways to their Isis and Osiris, their gods of afterlife and resurrection, and gods from their beginning.
The Egyptians emphatically believed in a golden age when the gods ruled the earth. 4 children came out of the womb of the sky goddess. 4 human-shaped children, 2 of which were Isis and Osiris. And they established a kingdom of the first time They called it Zeptepi. This was a golden age when the gods ruled the earth and brought knowledge and civilization. The balance between the cosmos and the earth was perfect, and happiness ruled the land.
A golden time in which Osiris ruled. But Seth, his brother, grew jealous, betrayed and killed Osiris. The world fell prey to chaos as Set cut up the body of Osiris and hid each of its 14 pieces. Blood and darkness came over Egypt. And Isis is the star Sirius.
One cannot overemphasize the importance of the star Sirius. Sirius was Isis, the life-giving force of Egypt. The star performs a very, very specific cycle. It is not only the brightest star in the northern hemisphere, in the whole sky. It wasn't because the star was beautiful and brilliant that the Egyptian venerated it, but it would disappear. Orion and Sirius would disappear for a period of 70 days. Now this is extremely interesting because the period of 70 days was also the period of embalmment. When they would mummify a king, they would take 70 days to perform the ritual, and therefore it's clear that they associated it to the disappearance of the stars for 70 days. 70 days they waited in mourning and in expectation and in fear that the star would not reappear and Egypt would not be reborn again. But then on a magical day that occurred at the summer solstice, 70 days later, the star would pop over the eastern horizon this time at dawn, just a few seconds before sunrise. And this spark of life, of the appearance of the star, was the greatest moment in the Egyptian cultic belief.
For at that same moment, the river Nile swelled from monsoon rains in a distant, unknown south. The Nile floods brought new life to a parched land. For Egypt, this was the yearly rebirth, so crucial that it took it as the start of its new year.
This miraculous conjunction.
So, the myth of Osiris is likened to a creation story. And they're basically saying that the ancient Egyptians used that not to say they worship paganism, but that was their understanding of how God created the earth and blessed them. This was their way of acknowledging God. But a lot of people will say, oh, they were devil worshippers, they worshiped Satan, they had their own concept of religion that was based on nature. Osiris was in the stars, he was part of the stars. Horus was his son, his only begotten son, who fought against Seth, the evil brother, the evil uncle. And on the third day, he rose over the horizon. He rose. And at that ancient time, he was the light of the world, the ancient world. See where I'm going with this? See these parallels that I'm throwing out there? A lot of stuff that we think we know was already put in place. But they ripped the label off of it because they didn't like it. They being the powers that be. And then they decided to relabel it, rebrand something that was already done. But why? Is my question. What was so wrong with the old label that you had to put a new label that nobody recognized? Sometimes people are just evil and they want all the accolades and the rewards for themselves. So they steal an idea from somebody else and they rebrand it as their own. So we'll get into more of this later on. Nice chatting with you. I'll join you later for another conversation.